Hi, my name is Candace Haas. I want to take a moment and thank all of our incredible viewers and customers from the pharmacy, the pottery, and the Natural Healing Center, as well as all of our friends joining us from around the world. Today, we're thrilled to welcome back Ashley Manta as she guides us through the complexities of dating as a cannabis consumer. Ashley is a perfect expert to break down the practical strategies for navigating the cannabis dating scene, talking about cannabis use with potential partners and introducing cannabis to those new to using it. She'll also explore topics to incorporating cannabis into foreplay and intimacy, dating non consumers, creative ways to include cannabis in date nights, and common pitfalls to avoid. Whether you're single, dating, or in a relationship, this session will provide you insightful tools for building meaningful connections while embracing cannabis as part of your lifestyle. Our Sex and Cannabis series is one of our most popular, and we're honored to welcome Ashley for our fourth year in a row as our special guest speaker. Ashley is an award-winning educator, a sex educator, I should add, a certified sexologist renowned for her Canisexual brand, which explores the mindful combination of sex, cannabis, and even psychedelics. She's the author of the CBD Solution Sex, published in 2020 in collaboration with Mary Jane in Chronicle books. In addition to her work as an education author, Ashley is a certified Bodysex Facilitator trained by legendary pleasure pioneer Betty Dodson, and the creator of Activating Your Cosmic Pussy and Sisterhood, focused on a series of online intensive retreats. If you enjoyed this discussion, make sure to check out the 3 previous webinars with Ashley on our YouTube page, where you can learn even more about using cannabis to enhance intimacy and deepen your connections with yourself and others. You can also see Ashley on Vice. She did a really cool episode. What was the episode called?
That was on Slut Ever. It was the Stoned Sex episode.
Yeah, that was a really, really fun episode. And she's done many other special news articles, and you can find her online where you can get a lot more information. Ashley and I have worked together for many years, and she's an expert, and she has also trained a lot of bud tenders, and she's a wealth of information. So really excited to have her with me today. I think this is a really great and timely topic. I know a lot of friends who have gotten back into the dating scene. And so I thought this would be really cool to have her on here today and just to ask to have a conversation and talk about, getting back into the dating scene as a cannabis consumer. Some of the things that, I and some friends have been talking about, things that we've come into contact or had situations happen. So really happy to have you with us today, Ashley.
Thank you so much for having me, Candace. I love doing this every year around Valentine's Day, and it's such a joy to talk about this because I think dating is something that a lot of us are navigating right now. And even if you are in a committed relationship, I think it's still important to date your partner, and cannabis can help you do that.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. And I think the people's relationships that do last are the ones that do have continued dates and do keep that fresh mindset. So I think you're completely right, because if you don't, then it doesn't last. So that's a good point. So let's kick it off with your personal experiences. As a cannabis consumer navigating the dating scene, what are some of the memorable encounters or challenges that you faced, and some of the valuable lessons that you have to share?
One of the lessons that I learned pretty quickly was that you should never assume how someone else feels about cannabis. I have been out with people who, by all other metrics, were very progressive and open-minded, but when it came to cannabis, they still had a lot of outdated ideas and, remnants of the dare and the drug war and all of that, the lazy stoner stereotypes. And they were like, oh, you smoke weed? Does that mean that you don't have a job, kind of thing? And it's so wild to run into that among people that you would generally consider to be pretty open to other things, but you just can't know until you talk to someone. And so I think it is helpful early on to have that conversation that especially if cannabis is a daily or weekly part of your life, that you share, hey, just so you know, I consume cannabis, or you can kind of work it in to your dating profile if you're playing with the apps. But I did have a really positive experience on Tinder 2.5 years ago, which was that I connected with a guy when I was traveling. I was in Toronto and we matched, and I told him, in the first conversation, I was like, hey, I'm a sex educator. Sex and cannabis is actually my specialty. And he didn't believe me. He thought I was catfishing him. He was like, there's no way. Like, those are my two favorite things in the world. How could you possibly be like an expert in them? Like, I'm going to show up and I'm going to get robbed, right? Like, that's what's going to happen. And that's not what happened. We had a great first date, and 2.5 years later, we are still together and planning for our future together. And so, like, it can go really well. And I somewhat credit like being open and honest about my relationship to cannabis right up front, even though he was a little skeptical, which I understand. That's a lot for a complete stranger to believe.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And with people having like, some people anyways, having like older or outdated or some stigmas about like cannabis or cannabis users, I found like even when talking to some people, like I would again too, like at the very beginning, tell them, I work in the cannabis industry, sort of like, and I was telling you, it's sort of like similar to people that work in the sex industry. It's like, just so you know, first thing, like I work in the cannabis industry, and they'd be like, okay, well that's fine, but you don't use cannabis though, right? Like you don't look like the type of person. And I get that a lot too. Like when I work at senior fairs or health fairs, they're like, oh, you don't use cannabis though. And it's like, I use all the cannabis. I use so much cannabis, you don't even know, but yeah, I feel like, again, like you're saying, like you have to tell them right away, like get it out of, the way, that if they're going to judge you, you want to know that right away. You don't want to get too far,
Exactly. I like to save time.
Yeah.
Your time is valuable. My time is valuable. Let's just make sure that if there are any like out the gate deal breakers, that we just establish that up front so that we can, move on with our lives.
Yeah. And you're also helping to change stigmas too, possibly, if maybe this person does have outdated ideas about who a cannabis user is, and you can change their mind about that and, show them a different, role model for who a cannabis consumer is. That's a good thing too. So, so that maybe dating and, the era of 420, is a good thing for the overall, modern society. So that's really cool. Is there any other stories that you can think of top of mind before we move on to like the next question that you want to share?
No, I feel like I've explored the spectrum, like of having it go so well that I now have a life partner, and having it go so terribly that like we never saw each other again. and anything in between those can happen.
Very good. So how would you say you can introduce cannabis into foreplay with a new partner in a way that enhances intimacy and comfort? So like, like for new users.
Yeah, I think it really, really begins with consent. Because you cannot legally consent when you're intoxicated, especially with a new partner, it's really important to have conversations about wanting to include cannabis in your intimacy prior to intimacy starting. So that means this is a clothes on conversation where you might say, hey, I'm curious about, using cannabis to enhance our experience. This is what I'm thinking, or this is what I've used in the past, and it's been successful in these ways. And then, these are the kinds of products I really like for this. How do you feel about it? Would this be something that you're open to? And really kind of figuring out where you are and where you want to be, and how the cannabis product or products that you're choosing are going to help you get there.
Yeah. So I would say like a good product to start for like new users and new couples, maybe would just be like a massage, like, topicals, external, like nothing maybe like too intimate.
I think that's a great place to start. Topicals, because they're non-intoxicating. Exactly. Like things that are going on your skin are not going to get you high. So, sharing massages or taking turns that way is a great way to start to introduce it, or having one partner draw a bath for the other partner and putting in like an infused bath bomb can be a really great way to kind of soak away the day and incorporate cannabis in a non-intoxicating way.
Yeah, I like those ideas. It's really good. And I think, consent is like really important too, and doing it, like you said, at a different time point before the intoxication. And that's mentioned also like one of our previous webinars too, which is really important. So what are some key tips when in successful dating when someone doesn't consume cannabis. So I mentioned that like previous in our conversation, like sometimes people in our industry date people that don't consume cannabis. I actually have a lot of friends who actually have like partners or even married to people who are not cannabis consumers at all, and how they like navigate that. So like, what are your tips, if you have, any suggestions for like dating non-consumers, like how that balances out?
Absolutely. I think it really comes down to mutual respect and clear boundaries.
Hmm.
So, chatting with your partner about where are their lines? Is it that they don't want to smell it? They don't want to be around you when they're consuming it? My brother's in the military. Obviously, we're not dating because he's my brother, but like
Hmm.
I couldn't have cannabis in the house when we were living together. And so if that's a concern, like where they are military or law enforcement or some other kind of professional where they can't even be around it, where are those lines? And is that going to impact maybe living together in the future? I think that's an important conversation to have. And if it's more casual dating where it's just like, yeah, it's cool that you do, but I'm not going to, maybe asking, would you like me to, swish with mouthwash or have pop a breath mint like after I smoke? Do you not want to taste it? And, just like thoughtful things like that. Because if I was dating someone maybe that smoked cigars and, that's a very pungent
Hmm.
substance to consume, much like cannabis can be. And, I might say, would you mind, doing it outside and then maybe like brushing your teeth afterward before you kiss me? And like, I think that's a very reasonable request. And it's important to be respectful and accommodate those requests. Now, if they're like, I want you to not consume for a week before you see me, that's pushing it.
Yeah. That may not be like the kind of relationship that would last like long term. Like you might try to comply with that like on the short term, but
Right.
might be a little bit hard to, navigate that kind of, request in the long term.
Right. And I
Yeah.
think it's also really important to not try to push someone's boundaries. Like if they are not a cannabis consumer, don't be offering every time you're smoking or doing edibles. Don't be like, "Oh, come on, like it's just this one time, like it's not going to pop on your like don't we respect people's boundaries. And
Mhm.
if cannabis is not a choice that they're making in their lives for whatever reason, that is really okay. And if it's not okay for you, then that's not someone you should be dating.
I agree. Yeah. I like that.
Yeah.
um, so from what you've seen are some common mistakes that cannabis consumers should avoid when they're navigating the dating scene?
I think one of the most common things that people do is they overconsume and or introduce cannabis too early.
Hmm.
Like, I am a big fan of not consuming heavily on a first date, especially. Like, I've done that once or twice where I popped an edible that hit me a little bit harder than I expected, and halfway through the date, I am suddenly a babbling idiot, and I don't feel like I'm showing my best self on this date, and, the date didn't go awesome. Now, if you are someone who is a seasoned consumer, you recreationally smoke daily a lot, and that's just like how you are baseline, then that's fine. But if you're like nervous about the date and you are out in your car like puffing before you walk in, maybe not the best choice. And especially if there's going to be intimacy on the first date,
Hmm.
see also negotiate before you medicate. So you want to make sure that you're not like high on the date and then suddenly like, all right, let's go back to my place. Oh shit, now we need to have a conversation. Like be thinking ahead. Err on the side of less is more and err on the side of having sober sex before you start to incorporate cannabis into your sexual experiences with a new partner.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah,
That's really good tips.
thanks.
Um, and then like on those same lines, like if you are like a seasoned cannabis consumer and if you can tolerate cannabis, what would be a good date idea for two partners that do consume together and like can, tolerate like a little bit of cannabis?
Oh my gosh, there's so many fun ways for people who do consume
Mhm.
together or who each consume to do it together. You could do kind of a puff and paint sort of date night where you smoke a little bit and then you pull out some art supplies and either paint or draw or make things out of clay, like just do something creative. You could pop a low dose edible and go to a concert together. especially a concert where there's like going to be dancing, not that you're just going to be sitting in your seats, where you can be like up and moving and having a good time. I really like doing, because I happen to live in Santa Cruz where there's a beach right here. I do a lot of dates where it's like, let's just go for a walk on the beach, getting close to sunset, and share a joint on the beach, like as the sun is setting over the ocean. I'm a romantic. So like, that's a really cute, fun date idea for me.
I love that. And then, like I know in LA they had like a 420 movie club where you can actually go and like smoke like on the roof, and like, that's pretty cool. And you can actually like make your own 420 movie club anywhere.
You absolutely can. My boyfriend and I love getting high and watching Disney movies together.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, there's tons of things that you can do like together high, with somebody. Or just maybe a teeny bit high, or like
You
an
could
edible
also like
yoga.
make a meal together, either when
Yeah.
you're consuming a little bit as you're cooking, or, infuse one of the courses with a little bit of low dose, either you're using an olive oil or you're melting some chocolate. There's lots of fun ways to like make cooking more fun with cannabis. So
Yeah.
that's another great date idea.
Or frisbee golf. That could be
Frisbee. Oh
fun.
yeah, if you're more active, you could go frisbee golfing, you could go bowling,
Mhm.
you could go play pool.
Yeah, tons of stuff. Cannabis makes everything better.
It does.
I love this. We could just brainstorm forever.
We could.
Now, if somebody's trying to meet somebody that's cannabis like-minded, maybe even like not a consumer, but that's like friendly to cannabis, what platforms would you suggest?
I think you could use any dating app platform and just put something in your bio that indicates, like, I would skip over something as obvious as 420 friendly, like that's been done, but you could
Mhm.
kind of drop breadcrumbs like, if you know what terpenes are, let's roll up
Oh,
together,
I like
like
that.
something that kind of you can tell if you know, and
Mhm.
that's going to attract especially the more savvy consumers, which is always a nice thing for me. Um, it's also really great to meet people in person. Like,
Yeah.
if you live in a city like Los Angeles that has cannabis cafes, what a perfect place to go to meet like-minded friends who consume. You could, hey, can I buy you a joint? Like,
I like that.
that could be a really fun thing. Or there's all sorts of like kind of cannabis events in LA. I know Ashley Belzo does Girls, Gays, and Theys, which isn't explicitly a cannabis event, but like those are really fun events that are a lot of cannabis consumers attend, or like the Puff Dow events.
Mhm.
I know Pharmacy does some cool parties and things. Like there's lots of either industry events or kind of industry hosted events that you could go to. And I imagine those exist in a lot of major cities that have cannabis.
Yeah. And in NHC Lemoore, we also have a lounge that does like some open mic nights and puff and paints. That would be cool too. Are there any platforms that you can think of like to stay away from? I can't really think of any, but like, are there any that you stay away from that you're like, when you're dating, you're like, I am not going to that platform? Like, I mean, maybe like,
There are some that I'm just like, I've never been super successful on, but that doesn't mean that they're bad. What I would say though is the ones that are specifically for cannabis consumers often have a really small user base, because like it's just a little too niche.
yeah,
And so that's not to say that they're bad, but like you're going to be fishing in a very small pond.
yeah,
So just know that that's a thing.
yeah. That makes sense though. I think at one time, like very long time ago, High Times even had like a dating platform, but that was like a long time ago. So, okay, very cool. So, what are some aspects do you think that cannabis users should keep private, maybe like on their platforms? And maybe when is the right time maybe to make that information more public, maybe to their partner?
Sure.
Um, you know, um, I guess like that balance of like putting that information out there of like I am 420 friendly versus like you don't want the whole world to know, because like what if like you're on the PTA, like all of a sudden like you put that out on like Tinder and it's like the whole school district now knows that like, oh gosh, so and so's mom is like 420 friendly,
Sure.
I
Yeah,
guess.
I think depending on your personal situation, you have to use a little bit of your best judgment on how public you want to be with your consumption habits. And I think even getting into the specifics of the exact frequency of your use may be a little bit overkill. Like, you could say I'm a regular consumer without saying like I smoke 4 times a day. Like I
Yeah.
think early on that might intimidate some people, or they
Yeah.
might think it as a challenge. You never quite know. But also if you're using it for medical purposes,
Yeah, I
maybe
was gonna say, you say maybe
you
CBD friendly or something if you're really
right.
like, wanna tease it.
You could say, I like balanced ratios, or, you don't have to come out and say, I use cannabis to manage my Crohn's disease, or,
Yeah.
I'm using it as I'm undergoing like cancer treatments. Like maybe that's not something that someone you just met has earned the right to know yet. So, you can just say, I do use cannabis medicinally and leave it at that.
Yeah, I like that. Um, what advice do you have for maintaining a healthy relationship with a partner who doesn't consume cannabis? And I guess this is somewhat similar to like the other question that we asked about. Um, but if you have anything to add to that, I guess.
Absolutely. I think one, it's always important to be communicating about possible like concerns that either of you have. If you see long-term pitfalls, you should be talking about that. If they're worried about legality or health or addiction, debunking some of those concerns or addressing some of those concerns can be really valuable. Um, and then also just like finding things to do that don't involve cannabis. Like
Yeah.
we all lead rich, full lives, and very few of us, cannabis is every single part of every single day of our lives. So, where are the areas where you do things that are, sans cannabis, and you can include them in those things.
Yeah.
And, like I said before, really respecting their boundaries is just so crucial, because I didn't drink for 7 years, and I would have been so disgusted if, like, going out with somebody that drinks involved them being like, "Come on, I mean, you should just drink," like, or like, "Let's go to the bar." Like, what am I gonna do at a bar? Maybe twiddling my thumbs. So, if they're a non-consumer, maybe you don't take them to a cannabis lounge. Maybe
Yeah.
you don't take them to a festival or like, Emerald Cup or, Hall of Flowers. Maybe you take them to the museum instead.
Yeah, you got to think of it from that perspective. If they
Right.
don't consume, it might be kind of boring to be around, people that all they're doing is consuming and all we do is talk about weed. I mean, they
Totally.
might think it's kind of interesting for a little bit, but it's going to get boring after a while. Like the novelty will run off
Exactly.
pretty quickly, but they're doing it maybe to be nice and to be with you. Um, that's cool. You've shared a lot of really helpful advice for everybody. So at this point, anybody that has any questions for Ashley, please drop them in the Q&A. Any other tips that you have for crafting a dating profile that authentically represents you as a cannabis consumer? I know that we've said, that you can. I like that the tip that you had. Don't like just be like 420 friendly. That's old. Drop other things like, my favorite terpene is, I like that, showing that you're elevated. You're not just like,
Right.
I'm a stoner, I am like an elevated cannabis consumer. I
Yes,
am like
I
more
know my
educated.
stuff. I've
You know,
learned things
I
beyond just
really
like
like,
a
yeah,
sativa. Like,
yeah, I really like that.
I
Besides
think
that, like just about you personally, maybe like how you represent
if
yourself.
if there is a deal breaker that you have, like if you know for sure that you don't want to date someone who doesn't consume, you might want to mention that in your profile. You might want to say, if you don't know what a terpene is, swipe right. Like,
I like that. Yeah, I like that.
you create these
That's good
little sort of
too.
challenges that maybe their algorithm isn't going to flag, because a lot of these platforms are not super friendly to drug use, even though, cannabis is medicine and we all know
Mhm.
that. But, these companies can be, and they seem to be getting more and more conservative. So finding ways to kind of code it a little bit in a way that it's a puzzle, and you will attract the right people. Like one of my best pieces of dating advice came from my friend Dana Hamilton, who's a dating coach, and she liked to say it is more important to repel the people that you are not compatible with than it is important to attract the people that you are. Like, you don't want to waste your time talking to people that are not on your wavelength, that don't align with your values, that are just not a good fit for you. And it's like marketing yourself, which is essentially what you're doing on a dating app, is about pushing away those people that are not a good fit for you. So like don't be afraid to be your authentic self and, post pictures of you at the High Times Cup, if that's like a thing that you do on the regular, holding a joint, if that's not going to get you flagged on the app. Because somebody is like, oh no, cannabis use is like, a sin or whatever, like they're probably not going to swipe on you. And that has just saved you time.
Yeah, that's true. Like, don't pretend, don't be fake, because you can't pretend your whole life, and you don't want someone that doesn't want the authentic you.
Exactly.
That's really good. That's really good advice. I like that, and it's very true, The point of it is to push away those that aren't, meant for you.
Exactly.
And with that, like, do you, in your personal opinion, do you think that it's better to look for people like online, or do you think it's better to meet them like in person?
Funny enough, since, I did meet my forever person online, I think dating apps are the bane of Western civilization. I think you are so much more likely to have a positive connection with someone that you've met in person. I think apps are just such a numbers game and such a like people misrepresenting themselves and using filters and using angles. And I just was turned on to the concept of hat fishing, where people who are balding wear hats to hide the fact that they're balding. I don't know. Apparently that's a thing. I don't care if someone has hair or not, but like there's just so much misrepresentation on dating apps, and it's just such a like superficial way to judge people, like, oh, you're hot, you're not, you're hot, you're not, you're hot, you're not. Like, I don't love that. But if you go to an event, especially an event that caters to your interests, if you go to a puff and paint, if you go to a concert, it doesn't even have to be a cannabis event, like going to places. I go to these things called Broadway raves, where people who are like mostly former theater kids dress up in costumes and sing along to like the greatest hits from different Broadway productions. It is the nerdiest fucking thing, but I have met some of the coolest people there. And like, if you go to Broadway raves, I definitely want to know you. I definitely want to, like, I would go on a date with anyone there who I found, appealing and attractive. So like, go to where your bliss is and let your freak flag fly, and you will attract people.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's where you're going to find people you're compatible with, that you have the same values and the same things that you like to do, and the same kind of people that you like to hang out with. That's where you're going to kind of mesh with people better than just random people they find attractive online too.
Exactly.
You're going to find better compatibility and, percentage that matches anyways than you will, with the algorithm of like swipes and stuff like that. So
Absolutely.
I completely agree. So how can people get a hold of you? And what do you have coming up next? I know that this is kind of timeless and that people will watch this for years to come. So people maybe that are watching in early 2025, what do you have coming up in the near future here? And then how can people get a hold of you?
So if you are watching this like in the immediate, tomorrow, February 13th, 2025, I am hosting a Dirty Talk workshop online. And you can find a link to that in my Instagram bio. You can also, for an evergreen audience, you can go to elevatedintimacy.com. That is the housing of all of my online courses that are pre-recorded. So you can check that out. I have a pre-recorded Dirty Talk class. I have my Skillful Lover bundle that has a bunch of my classes all together. I have a lot of really fun options. I have like a PDF that you can join, that you can download. And then I do have a sex and psychedelics class that is forthcoming. So by the time you're watching this, it's probably up. The best way to stay in touch with me is on my website, which is ashleymanta.com, ASHLEYMANTA, like manta ray. And you can also find me on Instagram at Canasexual.
Wonderful. Well, this is always entertaining, educational, and very helpful to me and to everybody that may be watching. I always have such a good time working with you, Ashley. Thank you so much. And happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day, everyone. And if you're single watching this, take yourself out on a date, get some friends together. Like, you deserve yummy food and flowers and sweetness and nature and sunsets, whether you have a partner or not. So be your own best partner, even if you don't have one.
Yeah, completely agree. Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And this is always great information. So thank you again, Ashley. I want to thank you, our speaker, the Canisexual. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for this episode of the Friends of the Farm lecture series. I hope that we were able to share some information that will help you guys all become better informed cannabis consumers, and that this information that we shared will help you find relief